You sure it wasn't harnessing the hot chili oil?
Oh, that could be possible too.
Yeah, that helps. In digestive alchemy.
It's like you think you're swimming in the water of life, agua vita, and then you find out that all these people have been pissing in it this whole time, and you're swimming in piss water.
It's only piss, dude. It's just piss. That's what you realize, is that there is no water.
So I'm here with two of my bestest internet friends who are both internet supervillains in their own right. Cinder Mountain Villager and Synthesis. I'm actually here to talk today about the ideas that Jay Dyer has put forward. I should mention that one of the YouTubers who's changed my worldview the most over the last approximately year and a half has actually been Jay Dyer. And Jay Dyer talks a lot about the occult and Hollywood and technocracy as well. So basically what the elites do, the elites that we kind of have a general idea of who they are and positions of power they occupy in, how they actually have a connection to things like Gnosticism, Luciferianism, and Satanism. And Jay Dyer himself is an Orthodox Christian. So he is able to tie all of this together into kind of the present moment. To a large degree, I think I myself, through absorbing Jay Dyer's material, have adopted a lot of his worldview as well, including Christianity. I really want to do one of these deep dives into concepts of Jay Dyer. Some people might ask, oh, why don't you just invite Jay Dyer on? That's maybe a plan for the future.
Well, and I think a lot of this work that Synthesis is doing is under those auspices of, could we have a conversation with him at some point? And first, to do that, you have to comb through his copious amounts of work that he's done in exposing just how much esoteric ancient knowledge and aspects of the occult that the elites are into.
Sometimes there's this saying that the spiritual battle that we face is something that dates all the way back to the beginning of man. And I think Jay Dyer does a really good job of illustrating how that is indeed the case, that even modern day technocracy or even the occult things that Hollywood engages in is something that dates all the way back to, under the Christian worldview, the fall of man. So I want to introduce Synthesis and what it is, his project that he's working on. Synthesis is our head of research, our little community on Iron Age Archive. He seems to be a very fast reader and a very good note taker. Whenever there's material that we need summaries on, we go to Synthesis. He's our go-to guy.
And now, if only we could find someone to do summaries of Synthesis summaries, we'd be in a perfect place. That's just a little competence dig there. You're too competent.
Brevity is the wit of soul. It is difficult to really summarize everything, especially with this Jay stuff. It's because he has been reading all of these things for over a decade, doing these film analysis and connecting them to religion and various secret societies. So it is difficult to hone down on all the details, and it's unlikely we'll get to everything, but hopefully we'll get through the general main themes. And to give you an idea of Jay Dyer's work, you'll see a video title, and it'll be connecting all these different things like Vatican, the occult, the CIA, and it's 4 hours long, and it says half. So it's like, wait a second, there's another 4 hours I'm missing here. And every single minute is packed full of information, and he connects all these different themes together. Start understanding the world a lot better. Maybe 15 years ago, I would be super into these various conspiracy theories and all these alien type of ideologies where it's like, oh, it's these Greys, these reptilians, and these Nordic aliens who are really running the world. And there's this cosmic battle going on. And after you grow up, you're like, no, there's really no proof of that. And then later on, I find that when I'm coming back to these similar themes, it starts making sense. Well, it's really all psyops, or there's something else going on here. Maybe Alex Jones isn't completely wrong. Maybe there are interdimensional beings out there. Maybe it's just metaphor, or there's something else going on here where there's a deeper tradition. Even though us as secular people growing up in a more atheistic age, more rationalistic age, we don't really believe in this stuff. But when you start digging deeper, it seems like the people who run things, they actually believe in these things, and they've been trying to recreate or continue these traditions that go back thousands of years.
And even in the modern times, someone like Carl Jung is very widely accepted. Jung talks about these archetypes and these egregores, these kind of psychological like they almost have like entities basically. In the most secular field of psychology, there is this idea that we're not entirely in control of our own rational processes.
To that Jung point, the savior of the right wing, Jordan B. Peterson, is a crazy Jungian. Jung himself was deeply involved in the occult.
Yeah, you start finding out all these different people, they're involved in the cult or cultic practices. You don't really learn these things in school. You learn their specific beliefs, but you don't really learn anything about their background, which limits what you can really understand about them and their perspective that they're coming from.
Yeah, well, I remember about 2 years ago, I was on my birthday actually, and a couple friends, we got together. Bill was there. At the time, my only Christian friend, one of my best friends since high school, was there. That was one of the first times that Bill had met him. And as soon as he sat down, that day he was watching a couple of conspiracy videos. One of the things he was getting into was this idea of backmasking, where when you play pop songs backwards, they have satanic messages. So he comes late to dinner, and then he sits down and he starts talking about all this like occult Satanist stuff to me and Bill and our other friends who were being very secular libertarians, who were just like, oh, this conversation has taken a weird turn. And later on, when we got back to my house, my friend insisted, oh, I got to show you these videos. So we watched the most famous backmasking video, Stairway to Heaven. Even then, it was still like, oh, I don't know. Yeah. So at the time, high school friend was kind of like the fringe of what was considered mainstream of the dissident right at the time, perhaps. 2 years later, my worldview is aligned almost completely with my Christian friend and is almost completely disaligned with Bill.
And that is simply an element of exposure, right? So when you gave the time to these documentaries, you gave the time to this information, you start seeing, to use a Jungian term, synchronicity.
Ooh.
Which is what we're going to be talking about to some extent in the form of Synthesist's research into Esoteric Hollywood by Jay Dyer.
Thank you very much. There is a lot to get through, but I will say on the point of secular psychology, it's almost like a rational version of what used to be shamanistic beliefs. Instead of being possessed by spirits or demons, instead you have different psychological diseases or you have different behaviors. I think there are really two different ways of describing the same phenomenon. It's just that one is more appealing to a scientific mind compared to a more religious mind. But what we'll find out is that human beings are fundamentally religious, and what we see today is more a secularized religion, and that spirituality is still there. And it relates to what we've been reading. We've been reading Spengler recently, and I think there's a connection there where we are in the more civilizational phase where things are more rationalistic compared to a more religious phase in the culture phase. And to begin, there's this concept, and Jay Dyer's first chapter is film as ritual, but I'm going to expand that more generally to film as religion. When people watch films, people do understand that they're being shown a message, and it's not just purely entertainment, that there are hidden symbols in a movie that the director wants you to see. And it's easy to spot the obvious ones and miss all of the various different, more occultic and more esoteric symbols. It's simply because people aren't aware of them, they're not exposed to them, and the message might be directly directed towards them. They're more directed towards specific audiences.
I think Jay Dyer also mentions in that first chapter that there's an element, it's kind of like psychological state again, where movies bring you into experience. You almost experience, I mean, it's not exactly firsthand, you almost live through the character. So it's not simply this like story being told to you, it's actually you're being put into the story.
He has these couple of paragraphs talking about how actors in more ancient times, they would become possessed by various spirits and demons to really enact gods. It was far more religious in a sense compared to what we think of as just pure entertainment. And we see a similar theme with method actors where they really get into playing a role. And you often hear stories about how actors would warn other actors about playing certain characters like the Joker.
I think Jared Leto sent dead animals to some of his castmates while he was method acting for Joker.
Yeah, I think he was already well on his way to the dark side by the time that came around. But I really want to quick speak on the possession thing. So Stephen Pressfield, for those of you who wrote The War of Art and a bunch of other sort of self-helpy type books, which I confess I did read. Part of his ritual as a writer is that he will do what the ancient Greeks did in arts, which is invoke the muses. So what you're essentially doing is invoking the spirits of the creative arts to possess you, possess your art, so that you can create something beautiful in their like. And it's the invocation, which actors also do. There are interviews of Oprah Winfrey and Denzel Washington talking about he just lets himself go blank and invites whatever's out there to come in and inhabit him, and the performance comes through him. And to those of us who are hip to what that means, very dangerous stuff.
Yeah, it certainly is. To a secular mind, people think, oh, that's just some weird voodoo BS. There is some truth to voodoo. Like, even if you don't believe in it, you can examine a person's changing behavior.
A commonly used technique in psychology today is hypnosis.
Which we wouldn't think there would be a science to, but there has to be a science, right? So perhaps with this other stuff, there is a science that we don't yet understand, which maybe some individuals in the far past understood as a science through ritual and religion, which is the occult.
They might not have understood it as a science, but they did have a method to their various traditions. And we'll find out later on how psychology, the occult, and the CIA all work together. Especially with the inception of mass media, they became masters of psychological manipulation. By the time of the 50s and 60s, they were already masters of controlling mass consciousness. I want to set the tone by reading a quote in Esoteric Hollywood 1. Genres are a form of contemporary myth, giving expression to the meaning of everyday life. Genres carry an intrinsic worldview. They become stylized conventions to portray universal conflicts whereby viewers can participate ritualistically in the basic beliefs, fears, and anxieties not only of their age, but of all ages. As Orson Welles once remarked, the camera is much more than a recording apparatus. It is a medium which messages reach us from another world that's not ours, and that brings us to the heart of a great secret. Here, magic begins. Genre films become iconic. That is, through repetition, a certain imagery, storyline, and characterization become archetypal. That's from Robert K. Johnston, from Real Spirituality, Theology and Film and Dialogue. And one more quote, an incomplete quote I want to read, is from Jay Dyer. And he says, if we reflect a little further on Eliot's comment, we begin to see that space-age man is just as religious, if not more so, than ignorant, savage, ancient man. The difference emerges as merely one of form and medium, not substance, and his new temple is wherever the television screen or theater feeds him his new narrative by which to read his world.
And to that point, the cult of scientism likes to deny that they have to resort to faith, but then you ask them, okay, if causality is true, then what was the first cause? What caused the first cause? What caused the Big Bang to happen? Then they will say, oh, we don't know that yet, but someday science will be able to tell us. So that itself is deferring to faith.
I sort of see it as how atheism or these various social movements and cults that we'll see later on, they're sort of being used to really break down traditional religions in order to make people more susceptible and open to a new form of religion, the technocratic vision. The end goal isn't to make people atheistic, it's to make them open to a new sort of paradigm.
Right. Yeah, the new age. I've had this thought before too. It's that you ever went up to one of these Trilateral Commission people or these Bilderberg people and asked them, hey man, what's your ideology? I think a lot of them would actually laugh in your face. Ideology seems to be something for us plebeians. It's not really something that they really take that seriously. Though they do themselves have an ideology, but it's not something formal like libertarianism or liberalism or socialism.
Or it's so hidden that they think they have the truth. As they are, you would probably assume initiates of a very old, ancient religion. The ancient hope. which is to get rid of everything, get rid of borders, which is consolidating power, and become the master race, become as gods. And so when we're talking about this ideology, specifically in the context of this talk, it exists for 1,000 years, but what we're seeing is it come about right around the time that television, specifically movies in Hollywood, come to be. And that, as Synthesist no doubt knows, had a lot to do with the CIA.
Exactly. If you take the words, if you think about the words television, think about it as like telepathic vision, and the word channel and programming. Channel is a very magic specific word. You channel spells and you program a person's mind, which is more a psychological term. You see these very occultic symbols and various terms come into play, and goes back to the idea of how I would say ideology is a secularized religion for the masses, whereas these elites, they have a specific religion that they follow that has a great long tradition that can go all the way back to ancient Egypt. And we're specifically talking about the occult and various traditions that arise from there. Like, for example, this is sort of a tangent. Nobody believed in the whole Bohemian Grove thing until Alex Jones went in and shot video of it. Like, even if you don't believe, like, oh no, that's some weird Halloween party type of thing, but you have to question, like, what are all these Republican men doing in this gathering? Why are they sacrificing an effigy of a child to this giant owl called Moloch? Like, what is going on here?
Yeah, who does that as a joke? Like, oh yeah, me and the boys just having a laugh, sacrificing a fake child to a graven image of a baby-eating ancient god mentioned in the Bible. Who does that for fun?
Even more recently than that, it's me and the boys just eating breast milk and sperm. Marina Abramovich.
At the Abramovich show, come on, man. You got to do it once. Cut your finger, eat the pain. Come on, it's just having a laugh. Me and Podesta. We can go look at Tony's art after this. How about it? So there's this plethora of instances of deeply disturbing activities that we're told to not look at as being real. But it's all very disturbing. Even like, and quick tangent, the Cosmic Pizza Instagram.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
From an advertiser, branding, marketing point of view, definitely not the direction you want to go in. I don't care how urban and hip and pomo you are. Super creepy.
Yeah, even if you don't believe in this stuff, like, oh, this is weird, you have to say, like, maybe I'm not getting the message or the symbols that they're presenting. This is a message for somebody else that's in the know, and we're just out of this party. It's not a party you want to be in anyways.
To fly in the face of rational man, I have a question. What does your spirit tell you when you look at this stuff? Are you not deeply disturbed?
I have a local friend who actually discussed some of this stuff with me recently, because he's actually from Gen X. He's actually kind of, perhaps Gen X was just more exposed to this stuff because of various cultural factors. But anyway, he says that initially a lot of people who go to these scenes are just horny people looking to engage in kind of multi-party sex, right? If you come from an atheistic background, there's kind of like something very attractive about what goes on at these parties, where you have all of these successful local business people and successful international business people sometimes, and they're all engaging in the various spices of life, right? Eating good food, surrounded by beautiful women. Then once you start having conversations with these people, some of them who are more initiated will tell you, oh yeah, I do this thing where law of attraction, or I do this meditation routine, like Shakti stuff, right? To master the energies of the universe. So that's kind of where it begins. And then once you start becoming more and more initiated, there are certain things in your life that change for better or worse. But sometimes it's like, oh, suddenly ever since I started this 7 chakras meditation, my profit margins in my business have gone up 35% or something.
666%.
Yeah, exactly. For us, the uninitiated, we look at this and it's like, yeah, this is gross, right? This is sickening stuff. But I can kind of see for people who come from a certain background, who are interested in this kind of personal success stuff, mastering the universe kind of thing. They haven't read the Bible. For them, it's like, well, this is the truth. My third eye has been opened.
So to that extent, it would only make sense that MI6 and the CIA would look at this wealth of knowledge and say, look, there's something here. We need to use some of this power for national security.
Yeah.
Even if they don't believe in it, they still see it as useful. Like, for example, you have these weird instances where they're doing these weird experiments, like the men who stare at goats type of thing. Even if they don't believe in it, they're still going to investigate to see if there's credence to these methods. And to people who are scoffing about these weird things, in our spheres, there's been for a while, people have been reading the various traditionalists who are into the occult also, who have written about these things like sex magic and the war spirit. These are things that are even relevant in our own spheres. You can see it take hold of people who do not accept more traditional religions, but they'll go ahead and accept these other more cultic influence type of ideologies. So MI6. MI6 is British intelligence that originated around right before World War II. And we have famous people like Christopher Lee and Ian Fleming who wrote James Bond novels who are involved in the occult. For example, I think everyone has seen that YouTube video, or at least seen the title where Christopher Lee talks about his occult books and how, like, if you read them, you'll essentially lose your soul in the process. And we see similar type of things with actors, how if you go to Hollywood, you have to sell your soul. We see all these different actresses who start as really young females. They eventually turn out to essentially these used up people at the end of the day who become pretty much a mess. And it's really horrifying to see. When you look back on it and reflect, it's like, well, there's something really odd going on here. Like every single time this happens.
Yeah. Pretty much all of the ones who went through Mickey Mouse Club, actually. Miley Cyrus, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera. This goes on and on and on.
I would even push it further to say that the Hollywood aspect is a more concentrated dose of it, whereas we see in universities as a more diluted dose with how people are being possessed by these ideologies. These normal people turn out into these various demons when they come out after 5 or 6 years these days, considering their academic abilities, but they turn out into these possessed people.
I did 6 years in an undergrad as well.
You're not the only one. Jay Dyer did 10 years, but he was working at the same time. Like, that's why he was able to read all these on this literature. MI6 is specifically foreign intelligence. That would be more equivalent to the United States CIA, where MI5 is more similar to the US's FBI. So Aleister Crowley is thought to be fairly widely known as someone who has basically worked for MI5, but he has also connections to MI6. There is a strong occultic influence on MI6 and MI5. It's basically intelligence in general, law enforcement also. And what you find out later on is that MI6 has a strong hand in creating the OSS, the Office of Strategic Services, which is a predecessor to the CIA.
We know how this occultic strain entered international intelligence.
Aleister Crowley, I think he's the one who really...
Oh, it's via Crowley? Okay.
Well, and I could go back even before Aleister Crowley, specifically to John Dee, who people know as the original 007. He was active in the mid-1500s. He worked for the Queen, and he was into trying to communicate with angels in order to tell the future, and he had some alchemical aspirations as well. And he was the one who sort of founded what we know as Enochian magic, which is the angelic language and channeling the spirits. So he would go to work for the Queen, essentially soothsaying, and was the start of sort of this clandestine services for the royal crown.
From what I remember, that ended in a very weird place.
It did, because he had a partner, I think his name was Edward Kelly. I know his last name was Kelly, who went in a dark direction, but Aleister Crowley thought for a while that he was the reincarnation of Edward Kelly. Ooh. And he tried to pick up a lot where Edward Kelly left off, which was black magic rituals to contract, to evoke and invoke with the darker spirits. And I would argue that they're all dark spirits.
You bring up a good point. I don't want people to think that it just began in the 1900s. This goes way further back. You brought up how John Dee was involved with basically the royalty at the time. Royalty and people who rule are heavily involved in this stuff. Like, it's not just a one-off instance. We see it today in our ruling elites too, even though they don't mention it, like Skull and Bones and various other organizations, even Freemasonry. There's a lineage that goes way back.
And if you think about what the lineage is, it's the lineage of Gnosis. It's man trying to unlock all of God's secrets, right? With the right Gnosis, man can kind of reach apotheosis and become gods themselves, or masters of the universe themselves.
And it's all by gnosis, as you said, which is knowledge for those who don't know, which is what you gain by eating the fruit which God forbade you to eat.
Yeah. And the atheistic view is that, oh, what's wrong with knowledge? You know, what's wrong with Prometheus giving us fire? The problem is that it's knowledge without wisdom. I think recently that came up in one of our book club discussions, that God, the Father, specifically forbade us for a reason. And it's not because he hates us and is jealous and wants to hold us down. It's because he has a plan. It's like the child kind of rebelling against the father without knowing what the father's intentions are.
Right.
The 6-year-old is like, oh, why can't I eat the candy? You just hate me and want to keep me down. Well, screw you, Dad.
Well, and this desire to have this knowledge and to know these things moves us on to the next topic, which is, what then did MI6 and the CIA do with this knowledge? Did they use it to make the world a better place, or did they start putting fluoride in the water? Did they start MK Ultra? Like, what did they do with this magical knowledge that they have? Did they start trying to manipulate people in Hollywood? Or
They found it was all BS and they never did anything with it. So that's why we live in this utopia right now, where there's no shady undergoings going on.
I mean, officially, MK Ultra shut down in the 70s, right? Don't do that stuff anymore.
No, we definitely don't do that stuff
Yeah.
anymore. Oh yeah.
podcast over. Everyone go out there and consume, and be sure to get the new Star Wars show coming out soon.
Yeah.
Black Widow in theaters July 9th. That really is the difficulty of trying to tackle a topic like this and trying to summarize it all. Jay Dyer is summarizing this long history of this occultic elite. And also, he's also read a lot of the books by people like Brzezinski and David Rockefeller and H.G. Wells and all of these people. And so he's summarizing all of that as well. And then now we're here trying to summarize that. So we're trying to get to the crystallized summary, but you can see that there's just so much to cover. And
Yeah, there's some different details and tangents you can go on it.
yeah.
But it's important to explore these if you're interested, since it really starts to explain how the world works and how in the modern mind, people don't want to believe in conspiracies or these different centers of power of how things work. But if you don't have that knowledge, if you don't have that mindset, then you can't understand why certain things occur. Like, why did all these different institutions work together to get rid of Trump? It must be because he's an evil orange Hitler. No, there's something else going on here. Why doesn't any of these US presidents ever get us out of any of these wars? Why are they constantly involved in these various different conflicts? There's different centers of power who are holding them to force them to take on these actions.
Even the term conspiracy theorist is something that was propagated by the CIA.
Imagine about a specific group that you can't talk about at all. Like, whenever you try to mention them or say something negative about them, there's a certain term that's thrown at you. And that's the same exact method that's been used, except in the case for conspiracies.
I think in our circles, there is another aspect to why not certain people don't want to explore this even, let alone accept it. It's because it kind of paints the picture that elites are much more powerful than we initially thought. Because I remember Bill, he would always believe that elites were right on the verge of losing power. That, oh, you see, look what happens in the culture wars today. Look, did you see what Kanye said? See, or did you see Brexit? The EU is falling apart. See, we're much closer to dismantling the elite power structure than you think. Things are looking up. Things are looking up used to be one of his favorite phrases. I think he said it in multiple videos. He actually objected very fiercely when I started bringing up some of Jay Dyer's stuff to him. Because suddenly it was like, oh, it's not just this kind of political battle or a culture war even. It's something much deeper. It's, it's this Luciferian and Gnostic strain of thought or strain of religiosity, and it's something that you can't just fix with meme wars.
For something like this, you really have to appeal to God.
Yeah, and that's the
And-
other thing. That's
Yeah, that for rationalists and particularly libertarians, not all, but is difficult because then you're not in charge.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it really conflicts with the individualistic mindset where you yourself are a free actor and who has human agency. You can still believe that, but you have to understand that there's something else going on here. Like the people we see who supposedly run things, they're still pawns. The various presidents that we see, the various politicians that we see, or people who run these companies, they may have some power on the face of it, but there's another power behind them pulling the strings. That's what people need to understand. Like even though those people might not be practicing these rituals, the people behind them are practicing these rituals. There's these aristocratic families that run for a long time.
And even those aristocratic families like the Rothschilds and the Warburgs, where do they get their motivations from? And that's a part of an even bigger religious discussion.
Yeah, it's not like something where you're going to go find a Freemason or someone who practices the Kabbalah and be like, oh yeah, explain all this to me. It's like, they're probably not going to understand it because they're not initiated into the higher spheres of rituals and knowledge. Even people who are investigating these things on the outside, it's hard to sort of compile all this information because you're not part of the in-group.
A lot of this impulse also comes from, well, basically the rebellion against God. It's like, oh, screw you, Dad. You're not my real dad. There's also, I think it's the Frankists, right? Which is like the most extreme variant of this strain of thought, where the Frankists, they just wanted to engage in every form of transgression as a way of telling God that he's no longer in charge. They would invert every commandment. And so if it's like, oh, I shall not do this. Oh, no, I'll do this times 100. To them, it's a liberation theology, right? Because now that I can rebel against God in every sense, I am truly liberated. Now I am the master of the universe.
Yeah, exactly. It's like a very libertine mindset where you're saying F you to God. It's a very edgy, adolescent mindset.
And that's where we find the most common thread between Esoteric Hollywood, the CIA, and all the other ruling elites is the desire to become masters of the universe. And part of becoming that is choosing exactly who they want to put into slavery and manipulate into slavery so that people will willingly accept chains. Thus, we have Esoteric Hollywood by Jay Dyer. Bill Gates, one of his biggest things was population control. Up until recently, when it became, we need to save as many lives with this vaccine as possible. So he did a big flip, but I suspect he actually did a 360-degree turn and made you think it was 180.
Something to know about Bill Gates is that I think his father was heavily involved with various elites also. I think his father was a Malthusian, so that's
Ooh.
the lineage of his specific beliefs in population control.
Yeah, Eugenics Society. It was either his father or his grandfather who was involved with the Eugenics Society, Margaret Sanger.
Yeah, if people want to find out more about that, they should check out Radical Liberation's stream on Malthusianism.
You know, how many journalists nowadays get all their information from Associated Press? Or all of these other central distributions of information. There's this misconception, oh, journalists are working the beat and doing investigations, but it's a lot more centralized behind the scenes.
Yeah, we find out how over the past couple years how the various journalists, they will all be in the same group chats and they all end up writing the same type of news stories. You can even see it larger in how the general narrative gets changed, how there will be all these different mainstream media outlets, they will all promote the same story and same narrative. At the same time, there'll be these various movies and TV shows that come out promoting the same narrative also. Like all these people are working together along the same wavelength.
Speaking about all coming up with the same stories, seeing that in 2021 be the UFO story. All of a sudden, officially, UFOs confirmed.
It's interesting to note that the UFO phenomenon and aliens more generally start occurring around the same time around I want to say the 1950s and 60s. That's really when we start seeing that appear in mass consciousness. It really began with War of the Worlds. That was the first experiment in manipulating a mass audience where people would sit around their radios at night listening to the next installment of War of the Worlds, thinking that there was an actual alien invasion occurring. And that incident was used and studied to basically understand how this mass manipulation technique can be used later on. A lot of the stories you hear about, basically all of them, about aliens and UFOs in general, you should consider them as a psyop. Like, you should never believe the official narrative about aliens. And you see this in films where, with these various films, how the mass populace is conditioned to start accepting aliens as an actual thing. Instead of demons, we have aliens now. And in the past, it began with how aliens are these hostile beings that we must fight against, like in Star Wars or in Star Trek or in War of the Worlds as the first one. And later on, we see with Steven Spielberg's E.T. how aliens become shifted to be these friendly creatures.
What's the Amy Adams movie that came out not too long ago?
Arrival.
Rival, yeah. And it's the aliens are the benevolent god beings who have come down to teach us the language of love. Human beings and your backwards ways of fighting wars and nationalism. Well, the aliens are here to teach us to transcend that.
Morgoth actually did a video on it recently.
Yeah, he did. Yeah.
And I think Jay Dyer actually gets into Arrival also. But Morgoth's analysis is that the world must unite, and we have problems because of poor communication. The whole premise is that we're trying to communicate with aliens and communicate with other governments ourselves. Like, I think the plotline was how the Russians and Chinese were communicating to these aliens through chess. And the message they got was that the aliens want to declare war. But Amy Adams, she understands that the aliens are looking for humanity's help and how they need humanity's help 3,000 years in the future to save them. And in order to do that, human beings need higher powers to guide them, and that human beings will need to become transhuman to survive. It's interesting to note that how the aliens themselves are not the main premise. It's that the alien genre is used to promote a certain message, a transhumanist New World Order message.
Transhumanism also ties back to the theme of cult, alchemy and gnosis, where instead of being made in the image of God, it's in the Christian worldview, man is this kind of flawed, weak being that's being held down by the demiurge. So we need to transcend our material reality to a new age where mankind can finally travel to the stars, which is basically a way of escaping the prison world of the demiurge.
Instead, you must be an atheist, you must be a scientific person. What they don't understand is that science itself becomes a religion. The people who that message is being promoted to, not the people who run these things. The people who run these things, they are religious also, they're just not Christian. They're more occultic.
Well, and the thing that I get from a lot of them is just don't be Abrahamic. Specifically, don't be Christian. There's all types of truth available in many of these religions except Christianity, and we need to be accepting of those things and then realize that there's something out there much bigger than your tiny human brain worldview. It's paradigm shattering. And I'm speaking specifically of what a lot of these movies are. When they show someone caught up in the past, it's usually some Christian or Protestant, Southern Baptist, Catholic type character that can't let go of the past. To some extent, it's never some old practicing Jew or practicing Muslim.
I guess to give credit to the Netflix movie Cuties, I guess it was, they finally took a shot at Islam, right?
Yeah, true, they did.
Even that is interesting because that itself is targeting another tradition. It's all to really deconstruct these various traditional religious beliefs in order to promote their own religion. Human beings were fundamentally religious creatures. Even if we do not have a specific religion, you still need a frame of reference to view things through. In movie terms, you need a genre to view things through. This demonstrates one of our simpler methods. Realizing that our activities will sooner or later come to light, we structure our activities so that as conspiracy researchers unravel them, they will release information in such a way that it mirrors our initiatory procedure. In this way, the more we are investigated, the more masses of people are psychologically processed by the people who seek to expose us. The meme that constitutes our structure is then successfully mimicked within the consciousness of those who investigate us. Success can then be measured precisely to the extent that our work is exposed.
Wow. So it's almost like in this generation, some of us will say, look at how bad this stuff is, but then that it's out in the light, maybe in future generations, it just becomes matter of fact.
So does this cover this research you've done, the entire book?
Oh no, the book goes
We're still on
into
chapter 1, aren't we?
yeah, the
Yeah,
entire book
that's-
goes into different movies itself. Yeah,
Since we have a little commercial break here, I'd like to give a shout out to Jonathan Pajot, who's also done a lot of work on symbolism, Hollywood, and he's analyzed quite a number of recent Hollywood productions, showing once again the same pattern of Gnosticism and Luciferianism. I would particularly recommend his video on Lil Nas X's music video. That's one of the most explicit forms of Satanism that we've seen in recent pop culture. Lil Nas X descends down into the underworld, kills Satan, and puts the crown on his own head. Which once again shows that Satan doesn't ultimately need you to worship him. He needs you to worship yourself. He needs man to worship man in man's image. That's how he overthrows the kingdom of God.
Yeah, the adding to that is worship anything you want but God. Do anything you want except the truth.
yeah, it's very explicit in the music video. Like Lil Nas himself, he has sex with himself, which is essentially worshiping yourself. It's quite explicit, the messaging.
I was going to make a joke earlier, but I totally missed the opportunity. Is back then you played pop music backwards. Nowadays you just play it forward.
Yeah.
Same message.
Oh, actually, one more thing on the alien thing is I think it also presents this picture of the universe as chaos. So Earth is just one speck of dust among billions of potential other civilizations out there. It's all chaotic. It's all like either panspermia or like random primordial soups flying around on different planets. One day, one of these civilizations is going to visit us and just make everything that we hold to be valuable seem so insignificant. Somebody who kind of lives under this paradigm of universe as chaos, it brings on a certain nihilism and YOLO attitude. We're just specks of stardust flying on rocks, zipping through the galaxy. So you only live once, you might as well just enjoy the ride or something. You don't know when E.T. is going to come down and bring some of his baddie friends or something.
Yeah, along that note, like you'll see these various cults appear around Hollywood too, like Scientologists and Heaven's Gate, and they all appear around the same time. If you look at the histories of the people who found these organizations, like L. Ron Hubbard, he was a science fiction writer. But he's also known to practice the occult. I think he was a disciple of not Crowley, but a pupil of Crowley, I believe.
Was Parsons, by the way.
Did Craig just burp into the microphone?
Yeah.
Right.
Becoming more. He's learning. He's becoming more human. I like how in the show notes we have a section dedicated to open-ended conversation, tangents, and ramblings. But we've been doing that throughout the entire discussion.
I think in the future I'll just leave like 2 hours as tangents and ramblings, and like 5 minutes as a specific topic.
Well, I think now that we're a little bit more familiar with the material, we know what constitutes a broad stroke in the notes and what is specific topics. Yeah, to say something like CIA's involvement with experiments, period, is like, okay, now we're realizing how much is there.
Yeah, it's just there's like so much to cover, and it makes you sound almost like a crazy person. I mean, which is what happens when we investigate these things.
Well, let's consider how to wrap it up as best we can at this point.
I think what we're doing in this initial discussion is kind of just uncovering, peeling back the curtain a little bit. People to see that, first of all, I don't need to tell a lot of people that Jay Dyer himself, a very smart guy, very well-read guy. For someone who could not as coherently explain it as Jay Dyer, quite often written off as nutcases, or we've gone too deep down the rabbit hole. But you just approach this, I don't know if open mind, but approach this in good faith, right? And the Steelman version of this is actually very, very compelling. And there are a lot of these little threads that you can go down to explain what's going on in the world today. Yeah.
Yeah, we're sort of peeling the onion. There's so many layers around here, and it's hard to really explain everything and connect all the dots when you need to have to also know all the various facts and details. That in and of itself is quite a task. And to try to explain better to the audience is we always think of, especially us in the Western sphere and the Western culture, we don't think of these things how like we're being psychologically manipulated because we swim in these waters. We grow up with these movies, these ideas, so we just think of it as normal. But it's very obvious when you look at another country's media and film series. For example, in Chinese film dramas, there's a specific genre where it's very anti-Japanese that focuses on the Japanese occupation of China during the Second World War, and always paints the Japanese as these evil monsters who do these terrible things, which there is truth to it, but as a narrative, it's used to create this nationalism in the Chinese populace for the Chinese Communist Party. And it's very obvious how the propaganda exists in that. And people are like, oh, that's just those other countries. But you have to remember that in the United States, the people who do these things, they have decades of experience and they're masters at this. They have psychologists who do these things for their entire lives. And we also see these things in movies like Transformers, where it's targeted at teenage boys, like with sexy Megan Fox, with giant robots battling each other, and also a U.S. military component where the U.S. military is portrayed as this good old farmers type of down-to-earth type of people who are these heroes fighting these galactic beings.
What's a bit funny about that too is like the Chinese government will always accuse American of having this giant propaganda machine, and yet they import all the big films. So it's like, well, we'll watch it anyway.
Yeah, even they're not aware that they're being subverted, or they're not catching all these different symbols and underlying conditions.
Or the people pulling the strings and the upper echelons in China are with the program as well.
Yeah.
It's possible because if you look at it, if you look at the entire world, everyone has a consumerist materialistic attitude. Like especially the Chinese today, like they're hyper materialistic.
So the point there is, even for those who are looking out for it or are conscious of it, it's like still kind of working on you in ways you don't realize.
And Hollywood consists of the tip of the spear of the subconscious battle.
To throw in an anecdote to sort of help illustrate this, whenever I personally watch horror movies, I always find myself, like my perception gets altered where I'm far more fearful of the dark and I don't want to go near any mirrors. This fear of mirrors starts to become heightened in me whenever I finish watching a horror movie. I'm not sure why. It might be some ancient brain type of thing or some unconscious manipulation, but I cannot just find myself looking at myself in the mirror afterwards. Like I also find myself having more nightmares afterwards also, where I'll see these like sort of demons appear, and I'll also find myself be susceptible to sleep paralysis after I watch these horror movies. That kind of makes me sound like a crazy person, but I think we've all had these like other supernatural experiences. But there's a more rationalistic explanation. Maybe there's a case to be made about the mirror thing, how you become afraid of looking at your own reflection. And there's a underlying truth where if you reflect on things, you're sort of self-examining and looking for a truth. But if you become afraid to look at to reflect, then you will never find the underlying truth and break out that perception.
Like that. Well, I was going to say one of the most terrifying moments of my life was right after watching The Ring in theaters. So that night after watching The Ring, I didn't want to go to sleep. So I was in the living room watching TV, waiting for the sunrise. I did end up falling asleep on the couch, and maybe I hit one of the buttons on my remote or something. When I woke up, what was playing on the TV was static. That just reminded me, this is the scene right out of The Ring, right? Where Samara's about to climb through the TV.
That's perfect. That's so funny. That could not have been more perfect.
Yeah.
I guess I'm not worried about tying it together.
I guess we are going to be revisiting, right? We're going to be doing a part 2, a part 3, and a part 4. To wrap it up, if you want to hear more about our delve into the worldview and research of Jay Dyer, esotericism and occultism and technocracy and Luciferianism, do subscribe to Iron Age Archive's YouTube channel and make sure to receive notifications from ironagearchive.com. However you do that. RSS, I guess. I don't know. Are there any other shoutouts that we should give? jaysanalysis.com.
Yeah, jaysanalysis.com. Just Jay Dyer on the internet.
Yeah, please go buy his book, Esoteric Hollywood, 1 and 2. They are very insightful. There's a lot of details in there and nice sort of like small info biographics of these various players who have a hand in developing these things, like Aleister Crowley, Ian Fleming, Christopher Lee. There's all these different characters that you have no idea who are involved in these things, and it all ties up nicely together.
Yeah. Now, how about Synthesis, your YouTube channel? I think a project that you could probably do is, since you're the master of putting together montages, you could actually put together some montages about Hollywood occultism, and maybe do a voice track over it.
Yeah, I'll probably do that. I think I'll do that with the Mulan idea too, because I was thinking about just focusing and analyzing the specific songs and how it really, in specific case in the Disney version, the anime Disney version, is that if you listen to the songs like Reflection, it's really about personal liberation. Specifically where Mulan, it's a feminist vision, whereas if you look at the Lieutenant, Shane, it's also a personal liberation type of idea too, but from a male perspective. And even the dragon too, he has his own personal liberation ideology.
Well, we look forward to that and more. Thank you, everybody. And thank you, Synthesist.
Put some links in the description.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for listening. This is my first appearance and possibly last.
All right, see you guys.
Yeah. Hopefully you don't get suicided by one of the agents who are listening to this.
I just want to say I'm not suicidal. I live life.
That's what they all say.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they all say before they decide they want to kill themselves that night.
Everything's conspiracies with him. Not conspiracies. Conspiracy. Singular. Reaching back to ancient Egypt, there's been a single cabal of powerful individuals directing the course of human history. But the common man prefers to believe they don't exist, which aids their success.
Global warming, military upheavals in the third world, actors elected to public office.
The spread of coffee bars, germs outpacing antibiotics, and boy bands? Come on, who would gain from all this? Who indeed?